Exercise 22. In the following position, it's black to move, and I give you two possibilities to choose from. The first of it is knight takes g5, and the second is queen takes g5. Now the solution. In the game that was played, black chose to take with the knight. And the whole reasoning of the black's player was, well, if I take with the queen, then I just win a pawn and it's a check, but nothing else. If I take with the knight, then I have a fork and I can gain material. And in itself, this is true, and this is decent choice if this is all to it. But this isn't the whole picture, because knight takes g5, first of all, doesn't win the exchange, since you need to calculate the active moves, and white has only two to consider, queen to h8 and queen to h6. After queen to h8 there is no continuation, so queen to h6 seems more reasonable, king goes away, it doesn't matter where, and now white can move his rook away. At the same time, the issue is this knight is pinned, because if you move the knight to any square, you will just lose the queen. So in the end, black simply didn't calculate anything, and he thought that he was the only player playing here, and his sole options was to win a pawn with a check or win a pawn with a fork. And with forking without calculation, he just lost himself the game. Instead, just taking the pawn with the queen gives you a huge advantage, black is ahead, and well, then you win just by means. You don't need to win harder than, well, you need to. Next position, it's black to move again. Now the solution. As always, you should start with checks. It looks actually like an endgame situation, but still active moves is the very first thing that you go for. So there is a check, which is obviously bad, but because king takes, but this is a check, you need to see it. Then capture, there's only one, and it is bishop takes a 3. Now after bishop takes, then there's a question, is there any interesting continuation? And you might be able to spot knight to f5. And this is basically the solution, because knight to f5 wins you a pawn, and this is almost certainly the game. First of all, white has to defend the bishop, so bishop to g3. This bishop you can take, and now you can choose from these two pawns which one you prefer to take. d4 is more important, but it's not a big deal if you prefer to take on g3. And now the game continues, but only black can hope to win this position, whereas white has a set defense coming from him. If instead you tried to think and outsmart the opponent, so maybe you had some ideas like playing knight to g6 or knight to f5, so certainly g5 doesn't win you the position, except if you play the same by a different move order. But just playing knight to f5 or knight to g6 doesn't give you an advantage, because one can play g4, and now both the pawn and the bishop is protected, and you don't gain anything. Next position, it's black to move. So let's check the moves. First of all are the checks. This is queen takes e3, well, queen will be taken back. Queen takes g2, loses the queen again, so these are not interesting. Then we continue with captures, and we come across to the move bishop takes g2. Now again, it's white to move, and if he takes with the knight, we can actually take his rook on c1, and if he takes with the queen, we can take the knight on e3 with check and the rook thereafter. So this rook on c1 is actually a huge important deal why the tactic might be working. That doesn't mean it will. It just tells us it's worthy of our calculation time. So bishop takes g2 is our candidate. Now we have to see all the active replies. So white doesn't have any checks. Great. So are there any captures? So obviously queen takes h5 and knight takes d5 we don't need to consider. We already discussed knight takes g2 and queen takes g2, so we are fine with that. So finally there are no captures left that we need to consider. And finally, are there any threats? And yes, they are. So I'm not speaking about a move like rook c7, since if you win a pawn and the opponent threatens to maybe win his pawn back, then it still tells us that our move is great. But there is also the move h4 attacking our queen. And this is a move that you have to consider before you take on g2, since otherwise you might be losing your advantage. Well, if you scream that h4 is a terrible move since, well, h4 isn't protected, the idea is to push the queen away from g5. Since if the queen takes on h4, well, then the rook isn't hanging any longer and you can take on g2. Finally, we have a piece for 3 pawns and it's about equal, whereas at the moment black is a pawn ahead. So if you have spotted the move h4, you get the second out of 3 possible points for this position. If you haven't spotted the move h4, well, I must say you did not solve the position then. And then finally, if we look to the position to the end, even though white has the move h4 and we need to consider it, it doesn't mean that the whole sequence is wrong for black, because as again we don't need to take since this is maybe the first intuitive option, but it is not the only one. If you try to systematically find all the interesting moves, you will start with checks, and the checks in this position are first of all bishop to f3. And if you find this move, then you get all 3 of 3 points and you have solved, well, this exercise. It continues with pawn takes g5, bishop takes c2, and in the end you did indeed win a pawn. And you are 2 pawns up and can be happy in the coming endgame.